Welcome back to the True Roots podcast, where men find their true identity in Christ through surrender and obedience. And excited to be back here for episode 5 already with Dan Cox. Crazy. Here we go again. And today we're going to be talking about purpose and goal setting. And I'm kind of excited for this topic. Really a little unsure to see what Dan's thoughts are over here on it. But I have a feeling that this conversation on purpose and goal setting will be different than anyone has ever had on purpose and goal setting. That is my guess. That is my guess.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. But I think it's going to be a different take.
We'll see. Yeah, I mean, we normally do some kind of prep before we talk about these things, but we did not do that.
No.
Yeah, we're going to be uncovering this stuff as much as anyone listening. Yeah. I thought like this was around the time of New Year's.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't know about you, but I like setting goals at the New Year period.
Yeah.
It's a good reset for me. And I think a lot of people do, you know? And so it seemed like a good topic, relevant to the timing, right? So
yeah,
it's on my mind.
Absolutely. And as I was preparing today, I said, I'm going to adjust this just a little bit here. Let me get this up here just a little bit. There we go. But as I was preparing a little bit this morning coming in, Mark 3:13 is the verse that I was looking up, and I had a pastor friend of mine, Mike Wilson, who said, we're talking about purpose. He goes, go read Mark 3:13, and then tell me what you think about it. And it's when God is calling the disciples, or Jesus is calling the disciples, and it says that he goes up to the mountain, and he called whom he desired, and they came to him. That's the whole verse. And then it talks about, the rest of calling of the 12 and all of that, but it really struck me in terms of like, what is our purpose in this world, and what are we about? And I think as men, especially, we get in this, in these topics of purpose, and we're like, I got to go figure out like, what is my purpose in this world? What am I supposed to go do? Without the first purpose being to go to him. And that's really what it came down to for me as I read that and went through it. It's like, he desires you, and all he wants you to do is come. And the first purpose is to go to Jesus. And if we're trying to figure out our purpose outside of going to him, then we're never going to actually walk into our true purpose in this world. Because we're doing it for ourselves and what we want, rather than walking in what our Creator has called us to walk into.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's like there is this broad question that like I think legitimately probably every person wrestles with, which is, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point, right? And sometimes it's like a little overwhelming, so you just like set it aside and tackle the next day. And sometimes you're feeling real motivated and you're like, well, let's just go ahead and set a 30-year goal, and like, this is what my life's going to be about. Yeah. Like, I remember when I was younger, it was like, I want to live a life. I don't want to just spend my life reading about other people's lives. I want to live a life people will read about. Like, that was how I had framed it in my mind,
Yeah.
I don't say that anymore, because it's not like, ultimately I don't get to decide where God takes me, right?
For sure.
And I'll share, I guess, how I landed where I have at this point in my life. It'll probably change again soon, but I like just that general concept of like, this is on everyone's mind. Like, what's the point? And our purpose is relationship with God, right? Like, God made us to be and wants to be with us. Like, he said eternity in the hearts of men. That whole idea it's not about like, oh, we're made for heaven. It's that we're made to be with God, who is eternal, right? And so there is like a very real truth to like what you just said. And so then that is how any other conversation of purpose can exist in a healthy way.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And so it gets into that second piece of it, because what is easy to do is to go chase purpose. Like, I need a purpose. I need to have something, because we are driven by purpose. I mean, we are driven by things that we would go after, especially as men. We want to have something that we're striving towards and going after. And, but maybe this is just a piece of realizing how foolish it is, but in my own life that I'm very stuck on this, like if you're going that way first before you're going to Jesus, then it's pointless. But I think that's just the case, is we can't have that secondary conversation without the first conversation. It needs to be there first.
Why though? Why? Because I think that's the natural question, is like, why can't I have purpose apart from Jesus?
Why can't you?
Are you turning it back to me?
I am.
Well, it's kind of what I was just saying. Like, primary purpose isn't accomplished. What's the point of the secondary? But I also think, like, you can tie it, theologically, it's like God created me. Mm-hmm. And if he created me, he didn't create me with just randomly and then just drop me and be like, well, like, good luck, Yeah. Like, there's purpose in creation. And if that's true, right, like, which I believe it is, that God created me and God's intentional, he has purpose in his design, then why would I seek to just like uncover that elsewhere? Yeah. I think that if I'm after my purpose in what I was created for, I have to know the Lord to understand it, right? I have to go ask him. And so, the rest of it is a lie. At the end of the day, right, if it's not the person who created me telling me what my purpose is, then it's not true. Yeah. Yeah. It'd probably be like you go to an art gallery or something, and there's someone pretending to be the artist, and you're like, oh, tell me about this art. Like, why'd you paint it? And they tell you this thing, and then like the real artist shows up, and it's like, well, that's actually not why I did it. And it's like, oh, well, now this is totally different. Like this painting, I understand it completely differently now because I see it through the eyes of the person who created it versus some obscure random person that's also interpreting it as though they were you, Maybe that doesn't make sense, but.
No, I think so. Absolutely. And I think too, is this is going to sound really funny to say, but people have purpose in this world that aren't following Jesus. There is purpose. Like they're going after something. Sometimes people are doing actually really good things. This mic's really annoying me today, but we're going to roll with it. But it's not their main purpose. It's not their true purpose. It's not his designed purpose. And that's where, like, we can chase after all of these things, but everything is meaningless under the sun unless it's for him.
Yeah, it's counterfeit, right?
Yeah, it's a fake purpose. And so you can feel this like sense of accomplishment or sense of doing something. But when you actually get down to the bottom of it and it's not who you're actually created to be, then it's pointless. Mm-hmm. And no one can know their true purpose apart from their creator because he created us. He's the one who made us for a purpose. It says that he's created works for us to do. He's gone ahead of us and done that. And so if we're not walking in the purpose that he has for us, then what we're doing, even if it's good, is meaningless. Mm-hmm. And it sounds weird to say, but that's the truth. And so we can go and chase after all of these things and go after the purpose of what we want to do. But really it comes down to like seek first his kingdom and to go after him and to God first and also love your neighbor as yourself. Like those two commandments is to love the Lord your God and then love your neighbor as yourself. Like that's a purpose. Yeah. That's something he calls us to take care of the widows and orphans. That's something he calls us to. And I think, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, but I think a lot of times too, we're chasing these things of purpose out of like what we want rather than the Bible gives us a lot of things to do already.
Yeah, totally.
Love your family well, lead your family well, serve in the church, serve people, take care of the widows and orphans, like I already said, like doing all of those things. And yet it's like, well, I gotta go find and a lot of times we look at it as men as our job and our career. I've got to go find that. Yeah. Well, my grandpa worked as an electrical guy for years, did not love his job, but went to work every day, did what he needed to do, and then served in his church and loved people well and loved his family well and took care of his family. And And don't get me wrong, I get caught up in it too, but it's like, if my business is not what the Lord wants me to do, then that's okay. Like, I'll go do what he asks me to do. And I think that's where we have to go and sit with him. And that's where it gets back to that Mark 3:13 verse is we have to go be with him.
Yeah.
And that's what he's calling us to constantly, is to be with him. The rest of it will come from being with him. And we can get into the practical pieces of this, but that's really why I wanted to start in that place first, is because with goal setting, with purpose, I mean, we've talked about this where goal setting, looking at 5 year, 10 years, like no one knows. No one knows the next day.
Don't even know the next, I don't know today.
Yeah.
Like what's happening today? I know what I think might happen.
Exactly. So
changed.
it's which is good. I mean, it's good to plan. We can plan. God talks about that.
Yeah.
But he's going to determine our steps. And so if you want to set a 5 year, that's great. But be understanding of the fact that that's probably not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And even if it is, it's only because that's where the Lord actually wanted you to go.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious from you, like, so you landed at this place, right? Of like, I have to seek the Lord to know my purpose. So but what's come out of, like for you, what's come out of, God, what is my purpose? Like, what's that, how has that like actually looked in relationship with God of uncovering that, of like, okay, God, like I believe this, I desire you first. What do you want me to do?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'll go into my story a little bit with that again from when I was working at Elite and what God had me do, and I'll share that in just a second. But what he also told me is I always write out, so getting the practical pieces of it, I write out what is success? What does success mean to me? And as I was praying through that with the Lord and asking the Lord about that, it was to be obedient to the Lord daily. That's my main goal in life. If I'm doing that every day, then I'm going to be in his will. Like I'm going to be walking towards him and following him, because that means I have to get to know him and continue to spend time with him. So what is success for me is to be obedient. I don't need any lofty big things. Like I want to be obedient.
I didn't hear any like dollars or cents locked into your goal there.
It's really strange, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I've had money before, and it doesn't work out if you're not following the Lord. So, but what was interesting is I wanted to start this business a year and a half ago. And I remember, and I have debt to pay off. I'm not working. I need to get back to a job. I need to find some post-word retreat, post coming back to the Lord. And I went on a walk with our former boss, and he had a part-time position there. And anyways, long story short, I took that position, but I fought it for a really long time. I was still posting online. I was still trying to get this business going. I was still trying to work. And there was a day and a point where he came to me with this business director role. Not something that I fit into at all. Like all of the boxes of what I'm good at were not the boxes of what he was asking me to step into. But I heard the Lord, felt the Lord, sensed the Lord being like, that, I want you to step into this. Okay. But not just step into it, but give up the dream of having a job. Because I wasn't going to be able to do this job well. I would even say that I still didn't do it that well, but I tried. But I wasn't going to do this job well if I was still trying to do two things.
Yeah.
And so the Lord was very clear, like, let go of that. Give that to me. And so I stepped into it. I stepped into what he asked me to do, because my success is to be obedient to the Lord daily and to trust that he's going to bring me to where he knows how I'm made.
Totally.
Because he made me.
Yeah.
So if he's asking me to step into something that's different than how I'm made and is going to stretch me and grow me and is going to be really hard, then he's going to get me to these places. And what's interesting is I did that business director role, which moved me into helping create the app, which is more the creative side, which is those fun things that I got to do. And then towards the end of that year, through a bunch of different circumstances, the Lord brought the business vision back up and to step into it. And it's still been really hard. There's still things I was talking last week. I'm gonna have to go sub. Like, it's not a simple process. And the Lord, it's like this, the Lord is gonna do it. But he has shown me, it's like, I've made you to be a coach.
Yeah.
And he's just continually talked to me about being a shepherd. You are a shepherd. Like, you are going to shepherd people. You're going to coach people. It may not be in my business. It may not be in a business. It may not be in a career, but I'm going to shepherd people. And I think that that's where job and purpose don't always go hand in hand in terms of how we look at it.
What do you mean?
So there's always going to be a purpose with the Lord, with whatever career you're in. right? To serve his kingdom.
Like a greater purpose.
Yeah, greater purpose. And you're going to do everything as unto the Lord, right? But he might ask you to do a job that isn't your purpose, like why you're here, in terms of how you view it and look at it and those kind of things. But it doesn't mean that you don't have purpose in that job or purpose in that career. And then he might ask you to serve in those capacities outside of what you do for work. And that's where I've had to let go of, because I've always wanted to just I want my career to be my purpose.
And that's like a pretty common narrative.
It is,
right? It's
especially
like,
for men.
Yeah, you should I don't know what the quote is, but it's like you should love your job.
Yeah.
Right? And like if you're not having fun, do something else or something. I mean, there's like these phrases that get thrown around that, I mean, I don't know. That sounds pretty self-serving.
It is. And I mean, it's great. If you can do that, that's wonderful. But there are realities to this life too, of taking care of your family and taking care of the things that you need to do. And I've had to walk into a lot of those realities post-divorce, of paying for Owen and doing those things and making sure that I'm able to do that. And there's times where I've walked in it trying to figure it out. I'm not great at it. And those realities, if God's asking me to do a business, but the business isn't making money, and I still have bills to pay, then I need to ask the Lord about this, because he wants me to walk into these things. Yeah, trust and faith and walk in faith. And I will. But a lot of times he's going to ask you to go do things and step into things as well within that faith, to trust him and to go do those things. Because a lot of times God just doesn't hand us stuff most of the time. He wants to walk with us in it, and he wants to grow us in it and teach us in it. And so in those pieces, it's like, are you willing to give up what you want for what I want? And that's where this purpose thing comes in, because if I was to say, no, my business is my purpose, for sure, and I do believe that it is, but if I was to say that's it, and I only go after that and I don't go after Jesus, then this becomes my idol, and I'm gonna do anything to make the business work.
Yeah.
Well, what if the Lord doesn't want it to work?
Right.
We had this conversation 2 or 3 months ago where I was telling you, I feel like the Lord is telling me to walk into this business and be obedient, but it looks dumb right now. It looks stupid. Yeah. And you said something that struck me in that. He goes, well, if the Lord asks you to do it and it does fail, did you fail? And it just hit me. No.
Yeah.
But we look at the success of it as I did what he asked me to do. And that's a little different direction here. But that really, purpose for me is doing the Lord's will. Mm-hmm. And if I'm doing the Lord's will, then I'm going to step into purpose, and he's going to give me purpose, and he's going to help me walk into those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So like practically it was like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And there's not this, because I think what I've wanted in the past is this like lifelong mission. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I'm put on the earth to do, and this is going to be the thing I pursue till I die. And I think there are people who end up with something like that. But most of the time, it's like the daily bread situation, right? It's like, all right, Lord, like, I feel like I'm called into this thing, fill in the blank thing, but I don't see the path forward. I need X for that to happen. Like, how can I get that? And God's like, well, go substitute teach. And you're like, but that's a different path. And he's like, I mean, kind of, maybe, but not, it's like, because again, back to the path is with me. Yeah. And if you're on that path, right? I think so, in this whole, like, what should I do? Like, I spent a lot of time with college students. Yeah. About 10 years ago. And one of the verses, it was really helpful for my soul, that I found to be really helpful for that age in particular. But just and the reason it was that age is there's a lot of life choices being made. Or it feels like I'm making these choices for my life. Who am I going to marry? What career am I taking? Where do I even go to school when they choose to do that? And like, they don't want to make the wrong choice. And we do this all the time. Like, I don't want to make the wrong choice. Like, where am I going to move and live? And there's a verse, I think it's like Isaiah 30, 31 or 32, 31, or somewhere in there. It's whether you go to the left or to the right, you'll hear a voice saying, "This is the way, walk in it." And it's been such a comfort for my soul because it's not about left or right. It's about, are you with the Lord?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you'll hear a voice, like, are you with me in the left or right? And so it's like, okay, do I want this is the purpose in front of me, or is it this? That's not the point. It's like, am I with the Lord, whether I go this way or that? And if, regardless of the way, if you did it with the Lord, you did it like the way you ought to do it. And you have to just trust the Lord with the result. Because I think a lot of times, like, our purpose gets put in front of us or me, and it's like really exciting. It's sexy. It's like cool. It's fun. It's like so much purpose and like possibility on the horizon. And then Jesus or God becomes a means to that end rather than like him still being the point. And this is just a way, like, for him to be glorified, this has become, my purpose is a way for that to happen. It gets flipped to where I need Jesus to help me fulfill my purpose. And then it becomes the idol, right? And that's like, and then when that happens, God's like, whoa. Like, this got flipped on its head. Let's stop this whole thing, and reevaluate. But it's easy to do. Like, I've found that happening in my life lots of times, and having to go, okay, sorry, God, like, let me reset,
Well, lots of different things that I love from that. But that verse goes hand in hand with Joshua 1:9 too, where we talk about the be strong and courageous piece of that. But at the bottom of that verse, it says, I will be with you wherever you go. Wherever. Like, he's going to be with you. But we have to go with him.
Yeah.
And so it really is that piece of it. And it's so easy, as you're talking about that, to realize that when we go after something with Jesus first, then when we face the struggles and the difficulties, because those will come, I think with purpose, you're talking about the sexiness of purpose, is we think it's going to be like, I'm fired up and excited now, so it's going to be simple and easy.
This is never going to wane. I'm going to feel this way forever.
Yeah. It's going to last like a week, maybe, at most.
Yeah.
And when you're walking into your God-given purpose, there are going to be many moments where you have to go to Jesus for it to work. And we want to find a God-given purpose. I put quotes on it because we want this God-given purpose that we can control and manipulate and make sure that we can do it so we don't have to trust in the Lord. And we want it to be simple and easy and not difficult. And but even in those difficulties, like, I can overcome, I can go do it. And we take that more than conquerors piece and forget that the only reason we're more than conquerors is because of Jesus. Faith as small as a mustard seed. Well, I don't move that mountain, he does.
Yeah.
And you had sent me something about George Mueller.
Yeah.
And how he would pray and pray and pray and pray, and things would happen. And that's the faith that the Lord wants us to walk into with any purpose that he gives us, is that we have to rely on him for it to get done.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, he's asked me to go sub to help supplement this business. He's given me that ability to do that. But this business is still only working if he does it. And right. I mean, I'll tell you, man, it's funny. I've shared so many things about my business where it's like clients are going to come to me and be like, I'm not working with you because you're telling me too many things about the business. But I got a client a day before I needed to, I have a business coach. And I hired him, and I'm like, I thought I would be making money at this point. And paid him his first month, not gonna be able to pay him his second month. And I'm praying. I'm like, Lord, I have to have a client or this is done.
Yeah.
And that day, got a client who paid me more than I've ever made for a client. I was able to pay him, and the business was able to keep going from prayer. I've been talking to this guy for 3 months, hadn't talked to him in probably a month, and then he reached out that day, got on a call, signed up, go. Mm-hmm. I did nothing.
Yeah.
I did literally nothing outside of say, Lord, I need help.
Right.
And he's teaching me in that, like maybe that wasn't the wisest decision to hire the business coach at the time, but he's guiding and teaching and showing and moving things around and guiding the path. But the only way that any of this goes is because it's his will and what he wants.
Yeah.
And it doesn't move from more effort. And it doesn't go from more effort. It goes from him first and then walking in obedience to what he asks us to do. And that's purpose. Because if we're the ones who are doing it, then it's going to be this place of pride or insecurity the whole time. I'm doing really well. I'm not doing well. Well, the walk with the Lord, I mean, in purpose, there's going to be times where it feels like it's going really poorly.
Yeah.
And it's going really well. But all of it's still within his will. There's going to be struggle. There's going to be difficulty. I mean, talk to a pastor about leading a church. It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that God's left you in the difficult.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that it's not purposeful and good in the difficult.
Right.
Be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. Like those things are happening in the difficult.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean it's not your purpose anymore.
I don't know. Yeah. And I wonder how many people, well, men in particular, think, oh, this is hard. It must not be my purpose. Like, I don't know that. I mean, maybe that's true. There's probably is like a portion of men. I think there is also this like, no, this is my purpose. I'm going to will my way through it, even though it's hard.
Yeah.
Instead of like, okay, God, I'm facing this resistance. Like, what's going on here? You know, and like being willing to lay it down. And because I read all these things, like I spend too much time on LinkedIn right now, and like I read all these quotes, and it's like, no, like you can create yourself, and like you just have to keep grinding through, and like don't give up on your vision and all this stuff. And it's like very you centered, and it's very much like the whole point is your mission. And so when it's difficult, it's like, no, you just have to work harder or try harder, or like, you know, invest more money into it, or put your family aside for a season, or whatever the thing is. And rather than just like, okay, God, like maybe I just need to surrender this for now and like let you help me work it out, you know? I don't know.
No, I completely agree. I think that it's the me focus versus the Jesus focus.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole discussion, I think, just coming into the purpose and goal setting discussion is like, it goes back to that first point, is it doesn't matter if it's me focused. If it's me focused, then it's always going to be about us and what we can do and what we need to do. And again, pride or insecurity, those are the only two options you have in that point. And let me just tell you, Satan sometimes in this world will allow, success when you're distracted and don't think you need Jesus. Like, he loves that.
It's a good place for him to have you.
Yeah.
I think there's something about that in Screw Tape Letters.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, so just because here's the deal, and this is very true, is if you're having success in this life, making lots of money, success is the worldly success, making lots of money, things look good, what would happen? That's the question you need to ask yourself. What would happen if all this fell apart? Where would I be? And that's, I mean, a different discussion, but that's the reality of what it is when it's my purpose, Jesus' purpose. Because with this one, it's open-handed, and it's going to grow you into a deeper depth with him, regardless of what happens, to where if things do fall apart, yeah, it'll be hard. It's like in this world, you will have trouble. It's not going to be easy if that happens, but you have him. Whereas here, you have nothing. You have yourself, which if I had to rely on myself, I mean, I wouldn't even be here in these last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so that's where, when we frame this discussion and we get into the practical pieces of purpose, those practical pieces mean nothing if it doesn't come from the fact of, I'm seeking the Lord first.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let him guide me into the path of where my purpose is. And I think that's another piece too, when you're talking with college kids or people that are younger and trying to help them walk into their purpose. It is tricky. It is difficult. We're all trying to figure it out. We want to know. I'm 37 years old. And this is the first time I've ever feel like I'm walking in my purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, at 18, I had the same questions.
Yeah.
But if I had at 18 said, I'm going to devote myself to prayer, spending time in the Word, walking with the Lord, growing in character, having a long-term vision of my life with the Lord, I would have been a different person.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know what all works out different, but I would have been a different person. And I know that it could have been a different path.
Yeah.
You know, and he had me on the path that he had me on to bring me close to him. But if we look back to be able to help someone else, that's what I say. That's more important as a purpose, is to know him.
Yeah.
Because if you know him and deeply know him and let him develop your character and go through suffering and just trust, you will walk into who he's asked you to be, and there'll be more depth and peace and joy and all of those things.
Yeah. It's, there's like this self-made narrative in our culture that is part of like the American dream, of like anyone can become anything. And, that's like pretty much countercultural too. It is true in a sense, but it's countercultural, or it's counter to what we were talking about, that like, God created you.
Yeah.
So there's a thing you should be becoming.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, you can become anything, but is it the right thing? And inside of that, there's this urgency to uncover it that I think steals us from the process. Mm-hmm. And isn't trusting God. Like the thing that I come back to for myself a lot, because I like get impatient.
Yeah, same here.
I'm like, when am I going to have some, cool influence and really see this thing like unfold? And the story of Moses, he's 40 years in Pharaoh's court. And one day, for whatever reason, seeing the abuse of the Israelites really gets at him, and he makes this decision. He kills this guy. It changes his life. Yeah. One day does. 40 years into his life, which neither of us are at that point in our life yet.
Yeah, crazy.
Like, until that point, he was just royalty in Pharaoh's court. And he goes to the desert. He's exiled, right? And he spends 40 more years in the desert before God calls him to go lead the people out of Egypt. So he's 80.
40 more years.
40 years in a desert tending sheep. Like, so he went from royalty to a shepherd where no one knows him. He's basically in exile. He's got this tiny community. And then God calls him into what we would say now was Moses' purpose at 80.
80 years old.
80 years old, right? And it was one day. It was one moment that changed his entire life at 80, though. And, like, I want it now. Mm-hmm. But, like, God knows, And the same was true of David, Like, he was anointed to be king. But it took forever. Mm-hmm. Like, I guarantee you he was like, God, when is this ever going to happen? Before he was king.
Yeah.
And the king was trying to kill him. It's like, I don't think this is working, God. The purpose you put on my life isn't real.
Yep.
Like, I think Samuel got it wrong. And you have to, like, God's timing just doesn't make sense.
No.
And if I instead busy myself with whatever the things are I think it should be, I'm like not in this season walking in my purpose because I want it to be greater or more or whatever. And like, there is this like level of surrender to like, okay, God, your timing is better.
Yeah.
And, but like, I don't know when that is.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add to that, just feel like speaking to young men today a little bit, is I've heard this said, this is not from me, but never let my character not match up with the platform that I have. Like to pray that prayer that I always want, whatever platform he gives me to share about him or do anything, is that my character would always match it or exceed it. And I've prayed that prayer, which is kind of sucky because then it slows everything down.
Or it's like the other side. It's like, well, I don't have much of a platform. Does that mean my character's not there yet?
Exactly. And let's be clear, like maybe you don't have, maybe he doesn't want you in a platform like we
Totally.
would look at with the world. So let's be clear in that.
Right.
But that doesn't mean her character's bad.
Yeah.
There's lots of people with amazing character that aren't going to get on a stage
It's
and
like
speak.
a depth of
Yeah,
relationship.
for sure. So let's be clear in that. But I think as we chase these things, when I was young, still young, right? We're talking Moses. I'm still young.
Yeah.
But
You haven't even gotten to life point change number 1 yet.
exactly. So, but I was chasing those things. I wanted those things. I was talking with mental performance coaches from professional sports. I mean, you worked in sports, all these things, but I wanted that professional job. I wanted to go after it. My character did not match any of those things, and now it's, man, some days I'm like, Lord, I don't even really want this business. Like I'd rather do something else.
Yeah.
But I want to make it clear to people, especially young men who see the social media age of influencers and people with platforms doing things. And there's a lot of people whose character does not match that platform.
Yeah.
And in the walk with Jesus, to get fame and fortune, would you rather have that than him? And if he puts you in that place, it's for his kingdom. It's for his glory, not for our own. And to chase that, to want that, to go after that, and to not go after him is fool's gold.
Yeah.
You might achieve some things in this life. You might get it. You might have that platform. But what if you get that platform, and especially if your character doesn't match that, you haven't gone through the fire with the Lord, you don't know him deep, it's going to be rough. It's not going to be what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I was reading Psalm 127 this morning for a different purpose and reason.
Yeah.
But, it's unless the Lord builds the house, the laborer labors in vain. Mm-hmm. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman watches in vain. And the guy who wrote that psalm is Solomon, who wrote Ecclesiastes, which his whole point of that is vapor. Everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Yeah. So that when he says, like, unless the Lord builds the house, everything, they labor in vain, he's saying it's pointless. And he's saying it's Ecclesiastes. It's like, there is literally no point to it apart from God. And so it feels really relevant to this conversation, right? Read it this morning. And it is convicting for me, of like how often I do anything without asking the Lord first.
Yeah.
Or how often I want to do things that God isn't necessarily directing me towards because I want them. And it's like, I want to not have a bunch of little kids in my house anymore. And like, but I'm not in control of that. And that is what I have. And like, if I go try to build something else that God's not in, like, it's a pointless endeavor. Yeah. But God is in this with my kids. And it's like, okay, well, God's building this. It's worthwhile work. Over here is a waste of my time. Mm-hmm. If I believe what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's just what I've been processing recently. But it's so tempting. And I think even in Christian circles, I said I'd mentioned my purpose earlier. I went to this conference. So you said I used to work in sports.
Yeah. And
there's a conference called the Daniel Summit for people who are on the business side of sports, Christians on the business side. And it's called the Daniel Summit because Daniel had an influence because he was excellent at what he did. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of great speakers. It was like John Gordon, Erwin McManus, and a bunch of other people that I think a lot of people would be familiar with. And it seemed to me like the theme of it all was live into your purpose and calling. And I walked away from it like, well, I don't know what that is. Like, how come all these people know?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm pretty sure now reflecting, like, people didn't, but they like thought they did or whatever, or they wanted to and they didn't either. And they're like, but this all sounds great.
Yeah.
And so it kind of kicked off this like year for me of like, okay, God, like, what am I doing? Like, what's the point? What's the purpose of my life? Like, what's my mission? You know? And I really resisted the idea of having it be like siloed into the parts of my life. It was like that my mission in my career is this, and my mission in the home is this, and my mission with my neighbors is this. And like, I didn't want these piecemealed purposes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted something that like extended over my whole life. And where I landed was, I want to know and delight in the Lord. And that's been really helpful for me as like my purpose. So when we were living in Phoenix at the time, and we moved to Wenatchee 4 years ago. And so in that consideration of moving, I had settled on this like being my purpose probably 6 or 12 months before that. And in trying to decide, should we move or not move, it was like, well, where will my family know and delight in the Lord the most? And that was how I made the decision of like, Wenatchee, this job, or stay here and this job. And it was like, it's been so rich, you know? And it was the first time I've ever made a decision, significant one, like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, where will I know and delight in the Lord the most? Okay, that's where I'm going. That's what I'm doing. And that is relatively open-ended. You know, it's like, tell me what that looks like, Dan. Well, I don't know, you know, for the next year or whatever. But it is like, and the other thing that I was going to say about that is like, what I loved about it, or why I was so excited about it, is like, you were saying this earlier, like all these other things like you can chase. You know, we hear people say, like Tom Brady, who won the Super Bowl 3 times, and was like, what else is there? He was also married to a supermodel, and you know, like had all the money, and or Buzz Aldrin, who walked on the moon and was like depressed afterwards. And like, you chase these things and then they end up returning void. Or you accomplish the thing, like, I'm going to be the smartest, richest, fill in the blank, most athletic, most accomplished, most educated, funniest of your craft. But there's an end to that. That's a finite pursuit. And God's infinite. He's an eternal pursuit. You cannot, like, I could never arrive at knowing and delighting in the Lord where there's no more to do. Like, it's infinite. And so this purpose that I have, I could never not have, even into eternity. And that's really exciting.
Very exciting. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can get behind that. And it's overarching, and it's been really helpful, you know? So anyways.
You know what? I think we're going to land the plane there. That's just so good. It's funny, I was thinking, like, how do we get the practical pieces in here? And I'm like, I don't think we need to do that today.
Yeah.
I think it just is what it is, because what you're talking about there, to know and delight in the Lord, that's your purpose, right? That's what you have written down, and you make decisions based off of that, and the Lord's directed and guided your steps in that. And that would be just my challenge. But I don't really look at the camera too often in this, but the challenge for men, especially looking at purpose, is to figure it out the way Dan did in that piece of what does that look like for you to know and delight in the Lord. And maybe it's different in what he puts for your mission, but that's really the truth of figuring out purpose. Is if it starts any other place, it doesn't matter. It will be meaningless. It will be, everything under the sun is meaningless. It's finite, like Dan just talked about, if we're not seeking after the Lord first, and if we're not walking towards him first. That's our first purpose, is to know the Lord.
Yeah.
And to delight in the Lord. I mean, those things are true. And so, anyways, I'm not going to look here too awful much, because it does feel a little weird, but I think that's just a piece of probably why we got on this topic today. For whoever listens to this, is that when you go to look at it, you're 18 to 21 to 25 to 37 years old, trying to figure out your purpose.
I mean, 55 and your kids just left. You
Yeah.
know? It's like,
You're going to figure out something again.
yeah.
Or like Tom Brady, who got divorced and is
Now
no
what?
longer like,
You're
what?
not,
Now
you're
what?
not a quarterback anymore.
Yeah. It's like you got to figure it out. And those things, things will end.
Yeah.
Things will end.
They're all finite.
They're all finite. And that's how I came back to the Lord. Things ended. You know? And it wasn't his will or plan, but that's what happened. Sin happened and those things happened, but he brought me back to where now it's know and delight in the Lord, right?
Yeah.
Be obedient to the Lord daily. So, well, we're going to end there. And if you're ready to wrestle some of this out in community, we do have our True Roots community, and the link will be in our YouTube bio, and then below in the Apple Podcasts as well. Click the link, join it. We have our belief matrix in there, dispelling lies, replacing them with truth. And then we can also just step in and talk more about what does it look like to walk with Jesus in purpose and walking forward. So thanks again, Dan, for coming on, and we're excited for next week.
Yeah, man. Let's go live in some purpose.
All right, let's do it.
All right.